here with no nonsense, cause you can't make sense if you don't make sense. A pod with freestyle discussion, poetry and social deconstruction.
People don't usually... Hi, welcome to the new No Nonsense Podcast. I'm your host today. Name's Tom. Also, people call me Big Beal. With me always is the other one.
That's right, that's Big of the Bird.
Big of the Bird, and then let me start you off. Okay. It was the night before the day in 1923. People didn't know that it was gonna go kaboom. Then in 1929, the stock market crashed, and people said, "I lost my money. All I have is a broom." I think that they really wished it wasn't that way, so that they had a lot more money to spend on that yay. And then the world was turned over because the Great Depression hit, and it really sucked. That was a nice poem by Robert Downey Jr. About the Great Depression, which is the subject of our conversation today. Bill, what was the Great Depression, and how would you categorize it in a F status like a tornado?
Well, what I could say, here's how I'm going to go ahead and start you off, Bill. It's actually a misnomer that it was even called the Great Depression at all. It was actually, it was actually just a rhyme for what it actually was, and that was the 8 Hessians. That's right, the 8 Hessians. And what those were 8 people from Haiti that took over an entire continent with only a few beads and you know, some PMA, positive mental attitude.
Did they take all the money from America?
Yeah, they siphoned it out and then loaned it to different banks in the Federal Reserve. And then those people in those position powers, namely Al C. Green and Richard Buford, delegated those funds to keep the economy sustained after there was a hit due to the Ebola virus.
No, this is back in 1929 we're talking about, the Ebola.
Yeah, and people conflate, the Great Depression with, like, down economic times for various reasons, but actually it was Ebola, and Ebola was just ahead of its time, and people didn't want to talk about it because it was, quite honestly, way too progressive.
Since we all know that Ebola is actually purple, and this is quite a plague, we can call it the Purple Plague. Why don't we call it the Purple Plague there, Bill?
Because they don't want to associate that with the Purple Hearts of the military.
Yeah, absolutely. And we know that Ronald Reagan had at least 2 or 3 Purple Hearts in the time that he served during the Great Depression. So let's talk a little bit about his term during the Great Depression and what financial contributions his party made to help the American economy strive again.
Well, what he did was take a few filibusters and expanded those out in his science fair lab projects. So his teachers allowed him carte blanche to do anything he wanted, and he did, and he, basically overcame adversity.
Did he encompass the whole or just half of the school bus paradigm?
Of the what paradigm, Bill?
School bus paradigm. Which, if I will explain, the school bus paradigm is where the American economy expects that it's going to get better and expects that a school bus is going to come pick you up and take you to school, when in all reality, you got to strap yourself up by your bootstraps and strap yourself in and get some money on your own damn accord, not depend on the school bus come around and pick you up.
Yeah, I would say that's an accurate description, but they did put holes into the paradigm of the school bus. I mean, I don't know if you remember the scene in Donnie Darko where the camera tilts and comes out of the school bus as they're entering the school, playing to that Tears for Fears music, but that was quite honestly, a representation of the 80s as far as politics go.
Yeah, I do agree. A movie from the 90s really represents the 80s. It really established what it was all about. I do also think that one of the reasons that the stock market did crash during the 1920s was, frankly, there's a lot of people that weren't mowing their lawns on the reg, and they let it get a little out of hand. And so that obviously spurred that took all the green out of the money supply and put it into the grass, because the grass stole all the green. There's only so much green, and I'm talking about the ultraviolet color that we can see on the spectrum, the visible spectrum here, electromagnetism, that there's only so much green that the Earth can portray at one given time, and the grass has been hogging all the green.
Well, like you said, it spurred it on, and quite honestly, that reminds me of the fact that, that economic downturn with that grass was spurred on by the Dennis Rodman corollary, which is the fact that he was one-dimensional, not multifaceted in his game, but he was still effective, but ultimately led to his downfall societally, and, quite honestly, his reputation. And that's the same thing as the Earth's green grass, and, that's where you bring in the Dennis Rodman corollary, and, any basic economics teacher is going to teach you that.
Yeah, I honestly see the correlation very strongly there. Also, one can argue that when Dennis Rodman married himself, that he then became two-dimensional, because there was two of them that married Dennis Rodman. So there, in fact, lies the paradox, which we call the DR paradox, of once you clone yourself, marry yourself, become one with yourself, you become two-dimensional in your basketball play.
I mean, I believe they might have tackled that issue on an episode of Futurama. We'll have to check the logs on that. By logs, I mean Wikipedia, but we'll take a look and we'll take a gander, see if the writers of Futurama and, quite honestly, the animators of Futurama were able to tackle that quandary.
Absolutely. Well, we digress. Let's get back on subject here. Let's talk about how boats were selling back in the Great Depression. How was the boat market during the 1930s?
Quite honestly, there's a man named Leo. I will not mention his last name or who this man really is. He's quite an enigma, but he single-handedly kept the boat economy afloat in the 20s. There's a reason people say that it was a roaring 20s, and that's because people like Leo roared it to fruition with the boats. There's people floating, there's people swimming, and there's people boarding docks, and that's all because of one man and his vision.
Well, that's what he did in the 20s, but then when the stock market crashed in October of 29 and the 30s began the Great Depression, what became of the boating crisis, especially since Leo himself got deported?
Well, quite honestly, that's a misconception with the general public. The problem was not within the boats. It lied inside the fact that there was no water left. There was no oceans. People forget the fact that the oceans went dry. Okay?
With the money?
Well, they went dry because people start taking, hand dryers and honestly, dryers to blow your hair. They start blowing them into the water. That caused the oceans and all the surrounding waters to evaporate. The only reason that those were able to make a comeback is because of Richard Paul Newman's, legislation that he pushed through Congress in the 70s to reinstitute oceans and reinstitute water. And we borrowed that from the moon Europa.
And was it the moon Europa that was able to create the condensation to have the then evaporated water turn back into rain and fall back on the oceans?
Exactly, Bill. You nailed it there, and that's why you're kind of one of my scientific muses, Bill. You really nailed it there. What he was able to do was reinstitute the entire ecosystem. And, we still owe a great debt to Europe. Everybody talks about the debt the United States is in, how much of an economic burden, and, quite honestly caused an anxietal malaise amongst middle-class America. But, the real problem is we still owe that great debt to Europa, and they have said they will demolish the entire Earth by 2025 if we do not pay that debt.
Absolutely, and that's why there's a lot of people that are afraid that another Great Depression is going to ensue if we do pay the debt. So we're in a kind of a catch-22 and a pickle here. We can't really get ourselves out of it. Either go back into a Great Depression, deprive ourselves of lakes, have way too much green grass, and either that or the whole Earth will be destroyed by this company. So it's hard to tell where the future is going to lie, but there's one thing that can be guaranteed, is that we'll all be comforted by a little poem by Big Burn. Big Burn, why don't you take it away?
That's right. Now, I know you guys are all afraid of another Great Depression, but don't worry, there's always another moon that can lend us out. Don't worry about what you're going to do when you're coming out. Just remember, you got a few boats down south.
Thanks, everybody, for listening to the No Nonsense Podcast. Next time you're depressed, don't listen to us.
Thanks for listening to our podcast. Hope you got some insight and a few laughs. That's all for now, folks. Yes, goodbye. Till next time, as long as we don't die.